Well, just to introduce myself, I'm Naomi Powell. I'm a journalist with the Financial Post here in Toronto. I'd like to thank everyone here for coming. We've got 4 people with an awful lot of on-the-ground experience in northern issues and infrastructure development. And for a journalist, it's a great opportunity to have you all in one place, available to answer questions. So I thought I would start by briefly introducing you. You are all representing associations or agencies that are fairly new, but that share a purpose in developing the North. So I'm hoping you can start by sharing a bit more about them, the driving force behind them, the strategies you're pursuing, and also the short and long-term opportunities that you see in each of your regions. So maybe we'll start with Darrell. You're the president and CEO of Denendeh Investments Incorporated, and you're also the CEO of DEMCO, the Northwest Territories' first ever mining exploration business, wholly owned by the territory's 27 Denendeh First Nations. So can you tell us a bit more about your region?
Sure. First of all, Denendeh is owned by the 27 First Nations of the Northwest Territories, and in the NWT, the Indigenous people are, I think we're about 52 or getting to be about 53% of the total population of the NWT, so it's a majority of the NWT now. And with that, it's I think the influence and the power and the influence from the Indigenous people on all sectors, whether it be political, economic, social, is going to have an impact. And over the last number of years, there's been the Inuit, the Gwich'in, the Saulteaux, the Tlicho have all signed land claim agreements. I think 2 major regions, the Dehcho and the Qikiqtaaluk, have yet to finalize their agreements, and those 2, I guess one is in the oil and gas region and the other one is in the mining or the Slave Geological Province area where a majority of the mining revenue is derived. So those are, in terms of the participation, it's really came out in the last 20 years when the mining services were starting to get performed by Indigenous development corporations. And more recently, in 2016, Denendeh did a study and looked at the economy of the NWT, and we've seen that mines do have an end of life, and the diamond mines are going to start ending. One was supposed to end this year or a couple of years ago, but that got extended. Diavik is ending in 2024, I think, and possibly 2027 for the other mines. But as exploration, as minimal as it is now, there's a possibility of that extending into maybe 2034 or 2043. But then if you look at the economy that's generated by the mining industry in the NWT, a lot of the revenues, whether it's through royalties to the governments, federal and territorial governments, and to the Indigenous nations that have signed resource agreements, land and resource agreements, and self-government agreements, those revenues are going to start dwindling, and also the employment. For example, just Yellowknife generates about $100 million annually in direct wages. The Tlicho communities generate about $12 million in direct wages. Should those mines close, the question is, what are the employees going to do? Currently there's 3,000 people that work at that mine. About half of it are Northerners. And so if those mines do close, then where are they going to go? What are they going to do? And the business generated a lot of contracting, anywhere from selling nuts and bolts to winter ice road building to catering, camp management, site services are all done a lot by the Indigenous development corporations and their partners in the north. What's going to happen to them is the question. So having seen that and then looked at the impact, the social impact, where people, we seen the impact, positive impact was there was less people on social assistance when the resource development happened. Now that graph is going to change if there's no more resource sector. So the big question is, what are we going to do? What do we have to do? And being a part of the Chamber of Mines for a number of years, we kind of track how much exploration investment in the north, and it's been declining considerably for that last few years. I think the last number was 80 million. But then don't let that number fool you, because I think it's actually only about 8 million of that is really greenfield exploration. The other is just production and more exploration on the mine sites. So the Indigenous communities, there's 34 communities in the NWT, and majority is Indigenous communities. Not all participate in the mining industry. Some did participate in the oil and gas industry earlier, but as you're all aware, that industry's virtually collapsed in the north due to regulations and legislation. Now, if we're not careful, it could happen to the mining industry. So the Indigenous governments got together, and in 2014, a historic resolution was passed by the Denendeh Nation Assembly, basically indicating that, given direction to ourselves, saying that we need to start working together with other Indigenous groups, such as the Inuit and the Métis and the governments and industry, and putting our minds together and see, what can we do to stimulate our northern economy together? So over the last number of years, we've had some economic forums where we brought everybody together, and the last session we had was in December of this past year here in 2019, and about 80 participants from all the communities got together and approved a framework of how we're going to work together. Now, it's not just approving a framework of working together, but a framework of how we're going to work together, because everybody says they want to work together, but nobody, a lot of the times we don't say how we're going to do it. So with that framework approved, we sent out a communique, and we formed an investment committee. That investment committee is comprises of individuals from the Inuit, the Denendeh, and the Métis, and then the objectives is looking at large infrastructure projects. Mind you, those large infrastructure projects, because of the regulatory processes, could take anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 years. So, but in the meantime, we have to eat, to make it simple. So we're looking at what we call projects of significance to our communities. And those projects could be smaller projects, social infrastructure, it could be housing, it could be water or roads or energy, etc., transmission lines, or real estate. something that's bite-sized, that we have the capacity to put in some equity and attract equity with a return that investors would normally look for. So those could be $10, $20 million or $30 million. And a part of that is looking at part of a merger and acquisition component where we have to look at projects that are generating revenue right away. So that's basically what the NWT Indigenous Economic Coalition that was formed is moving forward to. So I'll stop there, and if there's questions, I'll add some more later.
Okay, great. We'll get back to some of those questions actually when we get to you, Greg. Albert Drapeau is the Executive Director of the Yukon First Nation Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Well, Yukon First Nation Chamber of Commerce is a young organization. We're 7 years old as of January. Back in 1973, Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow was presented to Prime Minister Trudeau and Indian Affairs Minister John Chrétien. And in it, it set out the framework for Yukon First Nations and their land claims agreement. One part of it, and I'm just going to quote it, the Yukon Indian people must play an important part in the development of the Yukon. If we are to take part in the social, economic, and political life of this country, we must have a solid economic base. We must have a chance to help plan the future of this land if we are going to benefit from its development. So with that, it was the basis of the Yukon Land Claims Agreements signed by Canada, Yukon, and each First Nation government. It provides First Nation governments a place to make decisions on what happens within the territory on their Category A, B, and fee simple lands. As part of the First Nation final agreements, First Nation development corporations were formed to be the economic arm of the First Nation government. Today, First Nation development corps are striving towards the goals of our predecessors and have become major players in Yukon's economy. We have been involved and invested in the resource development sector, reclamation, energy, housing, manufacturing, climate change, technology, and community economic development such as stores, gas stations, and small business. And we are also involved in tourism. We, as the Yukon First Nation Chamber of Commerce, was formed because there was a gap. The dialogue wasn't happening between industry and First Nation governments and development corps. We bridged that gap. We are educating and building awareness, especially to Southerners, because a lot of the South does not understand the First Nation final agreements and their authority. We are advocating on government files such as procurement. We are bringing our partners, First Nation Development Corps and governments together, and that is across all regions. So we do work with Alaska, we do work with NWT and Nunavut and Northern Labrador. So what we are facilitators that we help build relationships and partnerships. We work with our, well, I said that already, counterparts in Alaska and NWT and Nunavut and Northern Labrador. And we are proud to be hosting the Arctic Indigenous Investment Conference, which is our 4th. which is being held in Iqaluit June 10th to 12th at Qikiqtaaluk's new conference facility. We know and have experienced the boom and bust cycles of the resource sector, as what Darrell is going through, but we are diversifying into many sectors and investing in economic infrastructure and our people so we can handle the downturns. In other words, we are resilient. We have been in Yukon from time immemorial, and our future generations will be here long after we're gone. We welcome responsible development. We do, however, need to ensure it will be in partnership, with consultation, with education of our values and responsibilities to our people and to everything that's on our traditional territory: land, wildlife, fish, water. To invest in Yukon, you need to take the time. You got to get to know our people, our communities. We have differing protocols, we have differing governing structures, and we have to be able to trust. So when you come to Yukon, it's best to take the time, learn about us, learn what's important to us, and that's how we build relationships.
And can you give us a sense of what sorts of short and long-term projects are priorities for the Chamber at the moment?
For the Chamber itself, we're working on a database, for lack of a better word, for our membership to build value for our industry partners, for our First Nation Development Corps, and for our First Nation governments. In essence, simplified, it is a database that will allow people wanting to do business within Yukon, or specifically a traditional territory of a self-government First Nation, to click and identify the Aboriginal business or other businesses, YFNCC members, doing or conducting operations within that traditional territory. It will help with collaboration agreements. It will help with identification of the Aboriginal business so that they benefit from operations. Another project that we are doing is a research project on the Aboriginal contribution to Yukon's economy and employment. We don't have those statistics. We have a general idea, but there's no formal statistics. And we do realize that it will be the first time ever, and it'll be used as baseline. What we have done in the past, we have sat on the Yukon Tourism Advisory Committee to develop a tourism strategy for Yukon as a whole, not just government, but tourism stakeholders, including ourselves and our counterparts at Yukon First Nation Culture and Tourism. We have also sat on the Deputy Minister's Procurement Advisory Committee to help with the Aboriginal procurement policy that will be inserted into the government's procurement policy. We have established relations with the federal procurement and the territorial procurement so that those benefits would be seen by our members. What else have we done? I guess our biggest win is the Arctic Indigenous Investment Conference. When we started hosting that was 4 years ago. We were expecting 250 people. And at the last minute, there was 400 people wanting to hear what Aboriginal business leaders had to say. They wanted to know how they can partner with our Aboriginal business leaders. And we had speakers from Alaska, NWT, Nunavut. So it was across the north. And from that, we have developed a Panarctic Business Leaders Summit that it's a closed group that has invitees come in and speak to them and talk about the issues that are important to the north.
Okay, and that took place at the Qikiqtaaluk Conference Center.
That will take place.
Oh, it will, which I know,
Yeah.
Sheldon, you're intimately involved in. So Sheldon Nimchuk is the Director of Project Development and Partnerships at the Qikiqtaaluk Business Development Corporation. And you also represent the Inuit Development Corporation Association.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about?
Certainly. Maybe I'll start with just a brief overview of the Inuit Development Corporation Association that was formed last year. And Qikiqtaaluk is one of the members, so I have an opportunity to participate with our president in those discussions. In essence, it started about 5 or 6 years ago at an invite to a Inuit Business Summit in Anchorage, Alaska, and with the Canadian development corporations being present, along with Inuit development corporations from Alaska and of course Greenland in its uniqueness. And in essence, from that dialogue that was really focused on areas of collaboration and the view that future east-west trade may be happening, not just physical trade, but intellectual trade. And from that, it was a general consensus that the two areas that, broadly speaking, from Alaska to Greenland, that it was felt collaboration within Inuit who have ownership to these large, vast land claims would be both in the marine and in the telecommunication sectors, in areas that weren't particularly in Nunavut, had a sense of Inuit ownership in those sectors. From a marine perspective, it was speculated that, in the future, could you envision a series of piloting initiatives across the country in which the different regions could take the leadership in piloting these. From that, the association was formed as both an advocacy group internally to align on those common areas of business that may be available to the members, and secondly to within our own shareholders and organizations demonstrate that the cohesiveness and the growing strength of the Inuit development corporations have a role to play in this future investment in the Arctic. So that's a little bit on the IDC component. In my role with Qikiqtaaluk Corporation and in the context of this discussion, I thought I would just speak to some real activities that we're working on from an investment point of view, because I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time at some of these conferences, and certainly there's a big hype about the Arctic, but the practicality of moving things forward, and I, for the purpose of this discussion, take the mining sector out of it, because it plays at a different level and growth period and experience over the years, but at a community level. So certainly clean energy, renewable energy at the encouragement of the federal government to really make a focused effort on reducing diesel. We have 3 live projects that we're doing now. One is to demonstrate a deep energy retrofit of an existing building. The materials are in and will be basically anything related to improving energy. That's our task. On the renewable side, it'll host about a 100 kilowatt solar array. We also, in Qikiqtaaluk, where the hotel is being constructed, it's being constructed on a parcel of Inuit-owned land. So we were successful in securing funding to undertake a front-end engineering design study to essentially determine the feasibility, both technically speaking and from a business point of view, our own investment in possibly going off-grid within Qikiqtaaluk. And the third initiative that we're underway with now is to demonstrate a 50% diesel reduction in a community in the Hudson Bay called Qikiqtaaluk. And we're underway with the environmental and and technical design. All of these and the uniqueness of Nunavut, where there are no power purchase agreements yet, it's a bit of a juggling act, but nonetheless, from our perspective, we can't wait for what's been taken forever to happen. And with the strong support of the federal government in moving these initiatives forward, we're underway. And the dialogue on these power purchase agreements will be necessitated by the fact that we're moving forward with these initiatives now. From a marine perspective, certainly Qikiqtaaluk Corporation, with in partnership with the government of Nunavut and the community of Qikiqtaaluk, last year submitted, I guess it was in November, to the National Trade Corridor Fund to build a privately operated port in Qikiqtaaluk. Unfortunately, we were not successful, but some of those reasonings, I think, we were asking a bit more money than the Canadian government perhaps thought they wanted to invest. We took the position, if it's truly going to be an operational port, and we used our business case and what we knew best, the offshore fishery, that is a real success story, and now has to travel to Newfoundland or to Nuuk, Greenland. So we had reasonable understanding of the travel distance cost, the fuel, and so we made our business case on what we knew. We didn't have time to reach out to the naval partners and Coast Guard and other users other than what we could draw from reports. In our conclusion on that, in terms of with the community of Qikiqtaaluk, as I mentioned, we positioned our submission to be a private port owned by an entity created between Qikiqtaaluk Corporation and the community, because ultimately, as we thought about the need to demonstrate the economic viability of that port, we concluded that we could be a lot more nimble in attracting other investors than being tied down a bit too much to the means in which government can make decisions. So that we fully anticipated in our debriefing that another call would be coming. So we anticipate that we'll be again putting forward our submission to develop a port. From a communications perspective, we are actively in discussions with an international consortium that have an interest in shortening the travel distance of underwater cabling by approximately 6,000 kilometers that would tie Europe, Asia, and North America. And with our recent creation of Panarctic Telecommunications, Inc., we're in a position now to at least see if we can quietly bring forward some form of comprehensive proposal that would link the Inuit development corporations in their own circumstances to the knowledge that Nunavut is really the most underserved in telecommunications, where the other regions have different areas of fiber now being unlaid. So again, that could be a real interesting investment opportunity. Of course, we're just starting. We're a paper company as a telecom with no experience, so partners in that strategy would obviously be part of what we're looking at. Speaking of the hotel, in which we'd like to offer an enhanced connectivity experience at that conference, knowing that there is no way that we could possibly achieve that, even if we bring in all the systems within the building, because of the realities of there's no bandwidth available, and no matter what you're told, there's choke points. So to solve that problem, we're looking at negotiations actively to purchase our own bandwidth, non-subsidized, because we have some key business folks that see the benefit of having enhanced connectivity. So again, we're close to that. In real time, we're working on that. And what that would see is at least a little bit of a fiber run from the direct link to the satellite through town and to pick up businesses. It's not enough, as I mentioned, if we prove it up that we can actually move forward with an unsubsidized model, then we think that's going to be a benefit in the long term. And finally, I'd like to speak about an initiative that kind of we are just getting underway with now, And for those of you familiar with Nunavut, Talarupi up in Ingmar or Lancaster Sound, our shareholder, the Qikiqtaaluk Inuit Association, recently signed Inuit Impact Benefit Agreements. And the 5 impacted communities in a benefit agreement with Parks Canada will be receiving multi-use facilities in each of the communities to help both co-manage the marine reserve with Parks Canada and to create the vision of a conservation economy and the flexibility of what we will work with the communities to see what that means, because we're just starting with the needs assessment, feasibility study, business case. But it's going to be a unique situation, I think, in Nunavut. I'm very happy to be involved in it because typically everything's gone through government. This was negotiated and it will be owned by Inuit with the support of the federal government. That encourages in the contribution agreements to go out and reach out to potential stakeholders and interested stakeholders that might become partners. And we'll be undertaking those tasks in the coming weeks. Additionally, there's 4 small craft harbors as part of that IBA. 2 will be delivered from DFO, I believe, and 2 through the Department of Economic Development and Transportation of the government Nunavut. Pond Inlet, because it actually has a small craft harbor now, opted to get some funding to develop, to build a training facility. And QIA simultaneously, or earlier, I had an IIBA with Baffinland to be geared towards a training center. So our division is now going to start from scratch to use both of those IIBA funding pots with the objective that this research and training facility in Pond Inlet will be open in 2024. So it's a very aggressive schedule. And there's a lot of dynamics that I think offer the opportunity, at least from my perspective working for Inuit development corporations and interacting, to be able to go in and work from day one with the communities that this is their own building, they own this. So the dynamics on, perhaps on the one hand, an IIBA from a mining company, on the other one an IIBA promoting the conservation economy, may have some conflict in some degrees, but it's going to be an interesting dialogue to fundamentally sit with the community and ask what they want, what they see, and not bring in a lot of prejudgments as to what this means, even though we know based on the dollars, we have a relative sense of what these buildings will be. I would suggest that that initiative is considering Parks Canada also has an IBA in Resolute Bay for a cultural center, and we're tasked with seeing if the 2 IBAs, the 2 facilities, can make sense to be together. When you look at housing and the Parks Canada, the office needs, I'd say that that's about $100 million in capital/lease agreements that I anticipate we will be working with. So anyway, a quick overview of some of the activities that we're doing currently, and to bring this back to the investment side, it's other than it's challenging because I think that while people are interested in the Arctic as an investor, I think it's primarily looking at the resources or some large initiatives that they can get the return on investment that their expressed interest might be. Whereas on a smaller scale, it's to try to keep those high cost of servicing investments so that all the dollars, as much as possible, can be put into the facilities and the programs that the communities need.
And I want to get back to some of those projects, as I know the way you built that hotel was very interesting and actually opened up a whole new line of business for you. Are we?
Well, I'm directly out. I'm on a really big group running really far over. What I think I'd love though is for Greg. Greg, I think this would be really helpful and useful for all of us if you lay out what Invest in Canada does and what you need from all these parties in the North to help you do your job and sell what you need to sell and create a story. And I think that would be really useful.
All right. So, yeah. So let me get to the nuts and bolts of things. So I mentioned before, I'm from Invest in Canada. In keeping with my colleagues, we're a relatively new organization as well. It's a federal agency. It is tasked to be Canada's global investment attraction and promotion agency. So what that means is we work almost exclusively with foreign investors, right? And we want to tell them a why Canada story, why they should be interested in Canada, why they should be here, why they should come here and take a look around and get to know us a little better. So what we do is we offer investors trusted and confidential services, connect them in with the right people, the right places. And part of that, in order to do that, is understanding what we have to offer. So my role, I'm a regional director for Ontario. I have colleagues across Canada, and then colleagues who are based in Ottawa that are focused on specific markets. So when we were created, this was a few years ago, but I think the same holds true today. We are focused on a handful of countries. So folks like Japan, China, Korea, India, the UK, France, Germany, and obviously the United States. Although we've seen a lot of FDI, foreign direct investment, come in from countries aside from the United States over the last couple of years. And that's one of the reasons we were created, was to try to diversify where our investment is coming from. And I think we've played a small role in that. So to give you a sense of what we do and kind of what we need or how we operate, so the first thing is promote, right? You might have seen, so we roll up to global affairs, specifically to Minister Ng, the Minister for Small Business, Trade and Export Development. Just in Davos a couple weeks ago, a lot of her sort of signage around her was Invest in Canada, right? We announced a big deal with Mastercard, a $500 million investment into Vancouver to support their cybersecurity R&D facility. So it's that type of stuff that sort of we're looking for, right? So we've been working with Mastercard for a number of years. We work predominantly with Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 type companies. Again, since we're a federal agency, we're really looking to bring sort of the big fish to Canada. So if they're not here, we're looking to bring them. And if they already are here, we're talking to them and making sure that their next investment dollar stays in Canada. So specifically in Ontario, and then I'll get into what we're not doing in the north, but in Ontario, most of you have probably heard of supercluster initiatives. We have superclusters across Canada. There's a digital supercluster in Vancouver, one based on protein science in Regina. Here in Ontario, we're blessed with a pretty significant manufacturing base, given that we're strong in the automotive sector as well as obviously other key sectors, ocean tech in the Maritimes, to give you a sense. So we're working with those folks. We're trying to create this narrative, again, when we go out to these various countries and talk to their multinational enterprises, we're telling them about what we're doing in AI. We're telling them about the type of talent that Canada is producing. We're telling the story about an innovation economy and that we're preparing for the future. That's sort of what, when we talk about telling a why Canada story, we haven't really done a great job in that in the past. I think Canada over the last, 5-10 years is kind of having a moment, right? We've got wind in our sails. Things are, for the most part, going pretty well. And we're starting to play a role in a lot more, in many more sort of international discussions. So we are taking advantage of that, creating, some pretty nice branding. We're out there selling Canada. Now, on the receiving end of that, here's where it gets a little complicated, right? So to give you a sense of maybe something that is tied to the theme of this conference. So NRCan has come out with a critical mineral strategy for battery supply chain. That's something that, Canada's, pretty good at, right? We have a lot of those upstream resources, right? We don't have the molybdenum, but we do have lithium, we have the cobalt, the nickel, and, the list goes on and on. Today, we play a very, a pretty small role in the mining of those initiatives, but no downstream services. And so part of the things that we're trying to do is, can we create that supply chain for Canada and take, a bigger role in, for example, if you believe, that batteries and EVs are going to become important in the future, we should play a bigger role in this. And so we're trying to, again, convene the right people. A lot of those are Chinese and Japanese companies who are already doing this, yet they have to go abroad to find sort of the raw materials. So, hey, we have a lot of these things in our backyard. We're missing a few key points to that value chain. That's where the government steps in and says, maybe we need to put some funding towards the development of these resources, but then, this will position us well in the future. So these are the types of conversations we're having. When I was talking to Jessica prior to coming here, the reality is we're not doing much in the north. Probably by design today. We were set up, as I mentioned, with sort of regional representation across Canada, but sort of aligned with the supercluster initiatives. For me, I'm responsible for Ontario, but recognizing that 40% of the FDI that comes into Canada falls into Ontario, and the majority of that falls into sort of the GTA and Southern Ontario. Nevertheless, it's important for Invest in Canada to have to know what's going on in at least Northern Ontario, and my colleagues, would say the same for Northern Quebec. And but we don't have anybody responsible for the territories, and perhaps we should. So that's something that makes a lot of sense. I would say that our colleagues at the other sort of quasi-developmental institutions like the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, really need to be at the table when promoting and investing in a lot of these projects, because it would be very difficult for a foreign investor to come in. We did talk a little bit about M&A opportunities, and that's certainly something that we work on. So in the case of a lot of mines, there's certainly a lot of foreign interest. But at this point, we don't really have a good sense, or I don't have a good sense of what are investable projects in the north.
Wow. So that's an opportunity to offer something to that. We know that other Arctic powers like Russia have invested a lot of resources into studying the regions, developing a vision and a strategy for how to pursue it. There has not been a clear northern strategy articulated by Ottawa for some time. It is your job to sell the north, as it were. How much would that help you?
Yeah, so immensely. Again, today we are set up, and again, we're a small institution. We're about 60, 70 people all in. Right now we're following the dollars, and the dollars have come from these specific countries to invest in these specific sort of parts of Canada that we want to promote. So when we talk about what we're doing in AI, that's a big deal. Everybody wants to sort of understand how to be a part of this ecosystem, and that ecosystem stretches really from Vancouver to Toronto. That said, it would be good to for us and perhaps our colleagues within Global Affairs to sit down and have a northern strategy about how to drive some of this investment to the north. I think that's a two-way street, right? We need to work. So, I work with our local economic development organizations here in Ontario. I'd love for us to develop better working relationships with our colleagues in the ECDEVs in the north, just to sort of understand again what's going on. Some of the mines up north, how we can perhaps drive, or at least knowledge of some of these projects when we have these conversations abroad.
Can I just add to that? Yeah. It's important. I'm glad you mentioned that the partnerships in the north, because through Canor, local Yukon Mining Alliance was just awarded a contribution agreement to bring the north together. We'll be having a pavilion at the PDAC session and also at the Arctic Indigenous Investment Conference. It's Invest Canada North. So I would encourage you to reach out to Ann Turner, who is the head of that.
So PDAC is the world's largest mining conference. Again, we have a significant presence at PDAC. We had one at Collision, which is arguably the equivalent in the technology space, where we're branding Canada around all of the, at least at Collision, at the technical innovations that are going on here. And at PDAC, it's the same idea. We want to really present Canada in a very respectable and recognizable as a recognizable brand for those foreign mining companies who are coming here to attend that conference.
It's interesting the gap that that you've outlined there. I know. Would you like us to wrap? Okay. Well, I mean, maybe we can finish by me asking you guys what you think the most overlooked opportunities are in each of the places you represent. Start with you, Darrell, please.
Like 1 minute.
Sorry?
Most overlooked opportunities.
The overlooked opportunities? I need an hour. I think in terms of what's being discussed now and investment, one of the things, especially with what we're working on now, investor certainty is a huge issue for the North. And I think we've had this discussion. I think Shirley was sitting here. I've had a discussion with Shirley a while ago in terms of what the trade commissioners are doing, traveling and trying to attract investment into the North. I've been out, and the questions that I received was, are the Indigenous people on side? The second question is the regulatory process, is it quick enough? Can we, is it going to drag out? So those are the questions. So I thought about that and said, well, what better way to give investor confidence if there's Indigenous participation in the economy? And that's part of the discussion that we had at the coalition level. And on a smaller level, Denendeh, we created DEMCO, which is Denendeh Exploration and Mining Company, which is 100% owned. We have mining properties. Now, that is a clear indicator that the Denendeh are interested in resource development. The challenge is getting the financing. So if you got $10 million sitting in your pocket now, I certainly use that to do a gravity survey and put a drilling rig on site. Any takers? But that's the key, I think, is creating that certainty. Because there's 633, maybe almost 700 with the Inuit communities across this country. And the resources are right in their backyards, probably within 200 kilometers of the First Nations. And they certainly want to participate and develop that.
Okay, very quickly, Sheldon.
You have
One.
in 20 seconds. Okay? Sorry, because I think what Sean would be on.
I would just say that I think from my time up there and all the dialogue I've seen, perhaps, the most, and there's obviously funding programs out there, but perhaps the most impactful nationwide investment that can be made is to deal with this deficit in connectivity. because I think that ultimately touches on so many things, and until that's solved, it's just not going to be, the digital divide is even going to increase more, and the young people that may wish to stay in their communities are going to be forced more to be continuously in the social side of things, as opposed to the dynamics that they can unleash with their culture and opportunities that are available locally. Thank you.